Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very nice. It was good. Only one good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we're quiet. That's great. Baruchim Habayim, welcome everybody to what is a wonderful event that is one of the extraordinary pieces of the extraordinary experience that is Yeshiva University, despite my best efforts. My name is Richard Joel. I work for most of you, and it's my pleasure to introduce this evening. First of all, I want to acknowledge, because she's still a new member of the family, the presence of the new university provost, Dr. Selma Bachman, whose office has facilitated. Stand up, Selma, so that they have a target other than just me. And I think this is a wonderful moment, and it's a wonderful moment for us to share. Just a few acknowledgments, if I might. First of all, it's always a pleasure, but tonight particularly so, to welcome Inga and Ira Rennert, whose involvement and caring has made many things possible at Yeshiva University, but whose vision and benefaction has made possible the Senator Joseph Lieberman chair. The other thing that I would say to you is that it is completely in character that a benefaction of the Rennert family would be named for someone else. And it's really just a statement of who you are and what your goals are. And it's rare, much too rare, for us to be able to find ways to steal you up to yeshiva. And please God, you should be well and have more opportunities to be here and to help us and to guide us. I also know that there are many of you here who are on various boards and the like. I do just want to acknowledge two of my university trustees, university treasurer Phil Friedman and his lovely wife Rose, who are in the front row, and Phil Rosen, the newest member of our Board of Trustees, who's hiding in the back. So, and of course I have many members of different university boards and chairs of different boards here, and we welcome you all, but it's only an hour program. After Senator Lieberman, or Professor Lieberman's address, he will entertain questions. He might even provide some answers for a brief period of time. And I want to welcome you here and say what an honor it is to be able to formally welcome Joe Lieberman as Professor Joe Lieberman. And how wonderful it is that almost whenever I see Joe, it's Joe and Hadassah. I know that I always get teased for, everybody jokes to me about Esther and I. And we know that that's a great bracha to be able to have that. And frankly, one of the things about the Liebermans is that it's Hadassah and I, and that's special. Inga and I. Boy, we can keep going with this. It's a whole, Rose and I. Anybody else want to have their, So why are we doing this? Not just this lecture, but the Lieberman chair. This is a mission-driven institution. We say nowhere but here. And it's true. There is no place like us, and that's frankly because of you in the room. The hopefulness of a Jewish future here in America and around the world is really dependent on a small group of passionate young people who believe that the Torah is a gift to the world, who believe that they have to own the Torah and that's their starting point, not their destination. That through the lens of Torah they embrace the world and people of goodwill and determined to matter. And that's what makes this place special. It's not Torah umada, it's not about the It starts with Torah, but it's really about you learning to be shalem, to be whole, and to help build a world of shlemut, and to help look to Medinat Yisrael as a place that is ineffably linked with our present and our future. But it's about what kind of people we are. And in that vein, when Senator Lieberman, who I've had the honor of knowing for many years, retired triumphantly from the Senate, we began discussions with him about our ability to take advantage of who he is and what he properly represents, to bring to Yeshiva University a focus on the pursuits of public policy, of ethics, in Hebrew we'd say yashrut, of straightness. And we talked and still talk about an institute and the like, but we decided that the right thing to do was to start with a chair. And through the Rennert's joyous responsiveness, we were able to establish that and then pursue our slimy secret agenda, which was to make sure that the inaugural professor, the inaugural Joe Lieberman professor, would be Joe Lieberman. And thank God Senator Lieberman and Hadassah agreed that this would be one of the key things they would do. I would tell you that I threatened to revoke their daughter Hani's diploma if they wouldn't say yes. But it's been a wonderful collaboration thus far. As part of the first year of this program, Senator Lieberman will be giving 3 public addresses and will be teaching a course undergraduate in the spring. And please God, this symbolizes a lot. You know, we're also lucky enough to have the benefit of Lord Jonathan Sachs, who's our Crissell professor, but only so because he's matched by being the Reddit professor at NYU, who's with us this is the second of many years that he'll be with us. The Honorable Danny Ayalon, Ambassador Ayalon. Gee, now who made that possible? Oh yes, it was the Rennerts, who will be with us for the spring this semester. And I have to tell you, that's the icing on a cake of a fabulous faculty. So I don't want to give a speech before the speech. I do want to say this. These are days when we're all challenged by looking at ourselves and by looking at issues of responsibility, of issues of power, of issues of who we are and how that plays beyond ourselves. So in introducing Senator Joe Lieberman, I'll just tell you a quick story. I have long been plagued by what many people call the imposter complex. The little kid who's in a museum and goes behind the stanchions to look at the painting, waiting for the guard to come and say, "Kid, you don't belong here, get out of there." And frankly, a lot of time in my career, it's been, boy, do I really belong here? Am I supposed to be here? And for a lot of time, I would drive my wonderful wife crazy saying, I'm worried that particularly now, I'm worried that I'm always wearing a costume. I'm wearing a costume because I'm appearing in this public role, and it doesn't matter who Richard is, I'm wearing this costume. And one day in discussions, just a little word made a big difference. And the answer is, I'm not in costume, I'm in uniform. I'm in uniform. And I wear that uniform, and that uniform tells me and the world the responsibilities I have. And it's a funny thing about a uniform that when you take it off, the world still sees that uniform. So when you're an admiral, you're not just an admiral when you're wearing the uniform, but you have to be responsible for what you've allowed others to see, and you have to realize that. On the other side, you also have to understand that when they're standing up, they're not standing up for Richard, they're standing up for the uniform. So you really have to live life, since leadership is what we all do if we take responsibility, being responsible just not in the narrow confines of our job, but as people, but always be armed with that sense of humility that we're doing our duty, but we have to remember who we are. I couldn't think of a better introduction than that. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Professor Joe Lieberman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for that warm welcome. For some reason, you bring to mind an old joke in introducing me as professor of a Jewish man who was very successful and bought a yacht. And needless to say, first weekend he had it near his mother. He invited his mother to come and see him. She came out to the boat. He was wearing white pants and a double-breasted blue blazer, and he showed his mom around the yacht, and she was very proud, and he said, "This is mine, Mom, and I'm the captain of this yacht." And his mother said, "Sweetheart, by me you're a captain, and by you you're a captain, but by a captain are you a captain?" So anyway, I'm not really by a professor, but I'm honored to have the title, and I thank you, Richard, for your really very generous words that are deeply appreciated. I thank you also for envisioning a program at Yeshiva University that would if I can put it this way, commemorate my public service by educating future generations of YU students for societal leadership. And I thank Ira and Inga Rennert for the generous support you have given, which transformed President Joel's vision into a reality that begins tonight. The Rennert family's charitable giving is extraordinary and reflects the best of Jewish values. And I want to say in a personal way that Hadassah and I are very proud to be your friends, and thank you very much for your support of this chair. Now, it was the Rennerts who first suggested that I fill the Lieberman chair for its first few years. I must say that my first reaction to this was to remember Dick Cheney being selected as the chair of the Vice Presidential Search Committee for George Bush that recommended that Dick Cheney be the nominee. But I'm not going to go off and talk about the 2000 election tonight. Maybe next semester. The reasons I was so gratified by the idea of establishing a Lieberman chair in public policy and public service at YU frankly made it impossible for me to say no when I was asked to be the first occupant of the chair. Because I believe that this chair has a unique and important mission in the years ahead, which is to help YU educate coming generations of Orthodox Jewish women and men in public policy and to inspire and prepare them for public service. To me, that mission is particularly important and necessary now because of two recent developments. The first is the pulling inward of some members of the Orthodox Jewish community, even though our texts and our teachers call us to go outward to bring the light of Torah values into a world that is still dark in too many places. One of the most popular Jewish standards for personal conduct that we all know is expressed in the Hebrew words tikkun olam, which, as you know, mean to repair or improve the world. Not to improve just ourselves or our communities, but to go out and improve the world. The second recent development that makes this chair, I think, really important at this time and why I'm so honored by it is demographic, and that is the population growth of the Orthodox Jewish community in America and the projections that in the generations ahead, that growth will continue and make Orthodox Jews a larger and larger percentage of the Jewish American community, perhaps ultimately the largest part. That will mean new opportunities, but also new responsibilities for Orthodox Jews. You who are students here now, and those who will follow you in the future, I think will be called on increasingly to be leaders in the Jewish community, to be representatives of the Jewish community to the general community, and yourselves to serve as elected and appointed officials in our government. I hope the Lieberman Chair can play an important role in assisting Yeshiva University in preparing and educating the best of the coming generations of Orthodox Jewish men and women for these expanding opportunities and responsibilities in American life. In my opinion, YU is the very best place for such a chair to be created because this great university has been dedicated since its founding to educating Orthodox Jews in Torah Umada, which for the purposes of tonight's lecture I will translate to religious and secular studies. YU was in fact the first yeshiva to offer its students a broad secular education. To its foundational Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, YU over the years added Yeshiva College, Stern College, and graduate schools like the Einstein School of Medicine, the Cardozo Law School, the Rebel Graduate School, the Sims Business School, the Wurzweiler School of Social Work, and so many others. In doing so, I think that YU has made a very powerful statement that an Orthodox Jewish university has a responsibility to educate its students in more than Jewish studies. It educates its students broadly for the widest opportunity our society offers. The history of this university may not be viewed in the way I'm going to describe it, but I view it, as you look back over it, as progressive and even revolutionary in its time. And so I hope that this chair will continue to expand that tradition, challenging Orthodox Jewish parochialism and advancing Orthodox Jewish outreach and service, because in my layman's opinion, that is what Torah requires of us. If you asked me what took me into a career in politics and public service, I would list three things. The first are the lessons I learned from reading history and biography. The second are the public service models of my youth, particularly President John F. Kennedy and Senator Abraham Ribicoff of Connecticut. But third, and in some ways most important, were the lessons and values of Torah Judaism that were taught to me by my parents and my rabbis, including a deep and abiding faith in the God of the Torah, the God of creation, revelation, and redemption. In many ways, I would say that Judaism called me into public service. The Torah narrative taught me that from my childhood that it's our responsibility to become Hashem's partners by improving and hopefully one day perfecting all that God created. I was also taught that while learning the laws of Judaism and observing the commandments and rituals of Judaism are imperative, the most important thing ultimately is how we behave, what we do, whether we act to realize our individual and communal destinies as given to us by the sacred texts and rabbinical writings of Jewish tradition. The Torah and Tanakh are full of role models that call us to action, service, leadership, and I would add public service. In the first paragraph of the Torah reading, coincidentally for this week, Lech Lecha, God promises to make Abraham into a great nation, to bless him, and then, very importantly, it says to bless all the families of the earth. In these words, God enters, of course, into the covenantal relationship with Abraham, but immediately tells Abraham that this covenant is not just for the benefit of him, his family, and the Jewish people, but, as God said, for all the families of the earth. Isaiah later described this as the responsibility the Jewish people have to be a, quote, light unto the nations. And again, I'd say not just a light within ourselves or within our communities, but, as it says, unto the nations. Abraham, of course, was the first believer in one God, but he didn't just believe. He acted. He smashed the idols that others worshipped. He followed God's instructions to leave his family and his homeland to pursue his mission, his destiny, which was to spread ethical monotheism. Abraham, viewed in this perspective, is to me a brilliant role model for a life of service to a cause larger than oneself. Moses is obviously another. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, Moses, if I was doing cable news commentary, I might say he could have become the next Pharaoh, but instead he responded to the call to protect and lead the Jewish people. He became the greatest Jewish leader, teacher, and prophet. He talked with God. and God talked to him. At the Red Sea, at that pivotal moment, which always has meant so much to me, with Pharaoh's mighty army thundering toward them and the Jewish people in a panic, Moses naturally began to talk to God, pleading with God to save the children of Israel. But God, I think, surprised Moses and said that it was going to take more than prayer. It would take action by Moses and the Jewish people. The waters of the Red Sea remained high and the Egyptian armies got closer until, as you know, I'm sure, one heroic man of faith and confidence, Nachshon ben Aminadab, head of the tribe of Judah, walked into the water up to his mouth, and then God separated the waters, and the Jewish people were not only saved, but put on the road to Mount Sinai and ultimately to Israel. The lesson, I think, couldn't be more clear, which is that God can but won't do it all for us. We have to make God's work our own. We have to have the courage and confidence that comes with faith to act. Queen Esther is another inspirational example, and I don't just say that because her Hebrew name is Hadassah, and that's, as you know, my wife's name. Queen Esther could, after all, have hidden her identity. That was her first reaction to Mordecai's plea as a Jew, and continued her luxurious royal life while her people were destroyed. But Mordecai challenged Esther, and she responded by risking everything, and in doing so, she saved her people. But what lingers with me more as I look back at that remarkable story is that Mordecai added another dimension to Judaism's call to action and leadership when he warned Esther with these words: "Do not imagine that you will be able to escape in the king's palace any more than the rest of the Jewish people. For if you persist in keeping silent at a time like this, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from some other place, and you and your family will perish." In other words, the Jewish people are eternal. The question, the challenge is, which of us will act to assure that continuity from our generation to the next? And finally, the story of Jonah provides a very different kind of example with a somewhat similar lesson. As we all know, God told Jonah to go to Nineveh, which was mostly a non-Jewish city, to tell the people there to repent from their evil ways. But Jonah ran from God and Nineveh. God pursued him on the ship he had boarded and sent the whale to swallow him and take him to Nineveh. Ultimately, Jonah realized that he could not escape the mission of service and leadership God had given him. And remember again that Jonah's mission from God was not to save the Jewish people, but to save this mostly non-Jewish population of Nineveh, people who were, as the book of Jonah makes clear, also the beloved children of God. These 4 examples, and many more from the Torah, help to draw me to a life of public service. I hope also that they will draw many of the students of Yeshiva College and Stern College into similar service here in America and, of course, in Israel. I know that they already have. There were many times and places in Jewish history, I must add, when, notwithstanding Judaism's call to public service, it was simply impossible for Jews to respond to that call because of anti-Semitism. Today, we are blessed to be alive when those anti-Semitic barriers have fallen in America and, of course, in the Jewish state of Israel. I must say, as I look back at my own career, I am struck that from the beginning, I had no fear that my Jewish identity or religious observance would hold me back from realizing my political dreams. And I give my parents credit for that. They really believed in the American dream. They taught me and my sisters that in America, you don't have to change who you are and what you believe to be successful. I hope YU students accept that truth, because it turns out that my parents were right. I say that from my own experience, because after all, the people of Connecticut gave me, a proud and religiously observant Jew, the great privilege of serving them in elective office for 40 years as a state senator, attorney general, and U.S. senator. And in the year 2000, Al Gore gave me the barrier-breaking honor of being the first Jewish American nominated for national office. If there is one conclusion from my career that I'm confident to make at this point, it is that we're blessed to live in a truly open country where anyone can go as far as his or her talents and hard work will take them. I want to illustrate this important point with 3 stories, because stories are always more memorable than narrative, and so that YU students will go forward with confidence that their religious observance will not get in the way of their career goals, whether in politics, business, law, medicine, or even the rabbinate. You got that. Okay. During my first term as a Connecticut state senator, 1971, there was, believe it or not, a budget crisis in state government that was divided along party lines. Can you believe that? Okay. One Friday afternoon, while negotiations were ongoing, I told the Democratic Majority Leader, Eddie Caldwell, that I had to decide whether to leave for New Haven to observe Shabbat with my family at home or stay in a hotel near the Capitol in Hartford in case there was an agreement. Caldwell told me he didn't expect an agreement, so like a good Irish Catholic, he wished me a Shabbat Shalom with my family in New Haven. As it happened, there was an agreement reached early Saturday afternoon, but Eddie Caldwell needed my vote to pass the budget. So he held the Senate in Hartford until after sundown Saturday night, when I could get there to vote. Now, the punchline of this story was an article written in the Bridgeport paper the next day, which was headlined, "Butch Caldwell and the Sundown Kid." It was worth telling the story for that line. In 1988, when I ran for the U.S. Senate for the first time, the nominating convention, as it always has been, was on Saturday. Consistent with the practice that I had adopted of fulfilling my governmental responsibilities on Shabbat if I possibly could, but not engaging in politics on Shabbat, I didn't go to the convention. However, through the wonder of modern technology, I did record an acceptance speech that was played on a large screen at the convention. That screen and I were pictured, because of the uniqueness of it, in the newspapers around Connecticut the next morning, Sunday morning. That year I was running against a popular incumbent senator, and most people frankly didn't think I had a chance to win. So you'll understand why a week before the election I really welcomed a call from a friend of mine named Con O'Leary, who was neither Ashkenazic nor Sephardic, a Democratic state senator who told me that he thought I was going to be elected. And I asked him, I told him I was really thrilled to hear that. I asked him why. He said because he had spoken to his mother, Mrs. O'Leary, and she told him that she and all her friends, who happened to be Roman Catholic, said they were voting Republican that year except for him, her son, and me. So when he asked them, he said why they were voting for me. They said it was because they admired the way I took my religion seriously, observed my Sabbath, and put my faith ahead of politics. What can I say to that but only in America? I guess I should add, God bless America, too. The third story happened in Nashville, Tennessee, on the night before Al Gore announced that he had asked me to be his running mate. The Gores asked our family to join their family, and we had a great time with them. And Al said to me at one point that he had decided 2 weeks before that he wanted me to be his running mate, but that he thought it would be irresponsible if he didn't talk to a small group of people confidentially about whether people he trusted, whether they thought that America was ready for a Jewish vice president, the proverbial heartbeat away from the presidency. So he said to me, I talked to some Christians and I talked to some Jews. And here's what I found. The Jews were very anxious and uncertain about what the reaction would be. But every one of the Christians said it would be no problem. And then, in a flash of gore humor, which may surprise some people, he said, so, when I heard that, since I know there are so many millions more Christians than Jews, I knew I could choose the person I wanted to be my vice presidential running mate. Now, the Jewish anxiety, of course, comes from Jewish history. But the Christian confidence and openness, acceptance, really shows that there is a new reality in America. I think these three stories speak loudly to the political acceptance of Jews and members of other minority groups in American politics, and this, of course, is part of what I look forward to sharing in more detail with the students who come to the courses I teach or the lectures that I will have the privilege to give here. But beyond politics and elections, there's another part of my experience that I want to explore with YU students, and that is what influence did the values I got from my religion have on what I tried to accomplish after I was elected. And let me just offer you a little taste of some of the things that I've concluded as I look back. I will tell you that I occasionally sought counsel from my rabbis on issues before me, but I never asked them how I should vote as a senator or how I should enforce the law when I was Attorney General. On the other hand, I do think that my core Jewish values really affected my priorities and what I tried to do. For example, the focus on making and enforcing laws, which is really what I did for 40 years in public service, seems to me to have come naturally from the centrality of law in Jewish tradition, beginning with the fact that in Judaism, as unique from other religions, God's revelation at Sinai expresses itself in the law. From Sinai came the understanding that without law and the values it encodes, the freedom that was realized after the Exodus from Egypt would have descended inevitably into chaos, violence, and immorality. Law was and is a necessary condition of a civilized community. I also feel that as I look back, my work to protect people from discrimination based on their race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation was undoubtedly, any other descriptor, was undoubtedly inspired by my faith-based belief that every human being is created in God's image, B'Tselem Elokim, and therefore has a birthright to human rights and equal opportunity. I think that my support of environmental protection was influenced by my religious belief that the natural world is God's creation, and I always remember that God instructed Adam in Genesis to both enjoy and guard the Garden of Eden. And that continues to be our responsibility, to use, to develop, but also to protect the natural environment. My priority commitment, which became really the center of my service in the Senate, to our national security and homeland security, especially after the terrorist attacks of 9/11, had a lot to do with the Torah view that there is good and evil in the world. And if good people and good nations lack the means or the will to protect and defend themselves, evil will triumph. In the courses I'm going to have the privilege to teach at Yeshiva College and Stern College, and the lectures I give, I'm going to try to enlarge and develop these themes. There are wonderful lessons from Jewish history about how to govern, and excellent role models for great leadership, like the ones provided by Moses and Joseph, as Rob Soloveitchik teaches us in the book Vision and Leadership, which might just be on the reading list for one of my courses. So, I wanted to say all this tonight in this inaugural lecture so that you would know both how grateful I am that there is a Lieberman chair and what I hope to accomplish while I occupy it. But I must say that I also wanted to write these remarks down, and I'm going to deposit them with the university so that those who follow me in the Lieberman chair will have some idea of what Lieberman hoped the chair would mean to YU, its students, and the larger community in which they will live, particularly in America and in Israel. I have a great confidence that this chair can help YU in its mission and do tremendous good for a long time to come with the help of God, and I should add, with the help of generous friends like Ira and Inga Rennert. Thank you very, very much. Well, I've got some time for questions. We're going to, about 20 minutes. So anybody, and I'll be happy to recognize. But anything I said or anything I didn't say, yes?
How do you see the elections this Tuesday? Do you think the Republicans will take control of the Senate?
There's a good non-controversial. How do I see the elections next Tuesday, and I'll repeat it, and do I think the Republicans will take control of the Senate? Obviously, it's very hard to predict because the races are remarkably close. But I think the odds favor a Republican takeover of the Senate, of a majority. And I do because there are more Democratic incumbents up, and the Republican candidates generally in some of these races are doing quite well. I could go into more detail race to race, and yet there are some surprises that make this not certain. This is the great thing about our democracy. So the Democratic candidate in Georgia, Michelle Nunn, is now a little bit ahead of the Republican. That seat is held now by Republican incumbent Saxby Chambliss. So right now the Republicans have to pick up 6 seats to be in the majority. So if Michelle Nunn wins that race, it'll be 7. As you know, probably, there's a very unusual and unexpected race in Kansas where an independent seems to be running neck and neck with the incumbent, Pat Roberts. If that independent should win and caucuses with the Democrats, then the Republicans have to pick up 8 seats. But they could still do that. I mean, they have three are, I'm giving you more than you want. The 3 seats that are held by incumbent Democrats that are not running again, everybody pretty much agrees will go Republican. That's West Virginia, Montana, and South Dakota. The Republican candidate is doing very well in Iowa, so that's a 4th. The Republican candidate is running a surprisingly good race in Colorado. That's a 5th. Same is true in Arkansas. A Republican candidate endorsed in public by my Bachatanister, Ruth Weiss, so you can imagine what a great candidate he is. Louisiana looks close. It'll probably be a runoff afterward. And then Scott Brown is running a very close race against Jean Shaheen, who's the incumbent in New Hampshire. So it's going to be a wonderful night for those who are watching. But I would still say that what's fascinating to me, I'll just add this last word. Normally, the out party, that is the party that doesn't control the White House in the midterm elections, does better. And it's particularly true in the 6th year, which this is, of the Obama presidency. And add to that President Obama is at a low point of his popularity, and a pretty low point for presidents generally. So you'd think there might be a kind of wave election here, but at least in the polling, it hasn't manifested itself. I'm sorry, this is what professors do. I'm going to add one other last point. The reason I think that there's it's a tilt in favor of Republican Senate is that one of the more interesting numbers, and once this gets in your system, politics, as my beloved Hadassah, she's concluded it is an incurable blood disease. And so I read these polls, and what's really compelling is the much higher statement of intention from Republican voters to come out and vote. and constituencies that tend to vote Republican are coming out in higher numbers than they did last time, 2012, and ones that tend to vote Democratic have a lower intention to come out. So I think that's why. So you'll see in the end how accurate my prophecy is, but that's what I think. Yes, way in back.
With the rise of anti-Semitism all over the world and even in the United States, do you think that an Orthodox Jewish candidate would be as welcome in a national election as the election that we're not talking about in 2000?
Yeah, you know, that's a really unsettling question, and you're the second person to ask me in a week, because first somebody asked me, do you think do you think 30 years before 2000 you could have been asked to run for vice president and run with no real anti-Semitism? Please understand when I say the next thing I do, and actually get 500,000 more votes than the other candidate got. I'm not relitigating the results, but I just wanted to put that on the record. But what a great thing to say about the openness of the American people. So I said, no, I don't think 30 years ago that would have happened. It just, American society, for a lot of reasons, became more and more open. And then he asked me, what about 30 years from now? And of course, as a statement of faith, and I do have this faith in America, the whole constitutional premise of our country, the priority put on openness, I would say, yes, it will still be possible, certainly possible today. But you know, this is not going to be that way unless we fight to make it so. And we stay alert to any indications, which we already begin to see now, particularly dreadfully on college campuses, not obviously on this one, of signs of anti-Semitism. So, and what's happening in Europe today is hard to believe, really. What an irony. I had a friend who went over for the opening of a Jewish museum in Warsaw. And it's not that everything is perfect in Warsaw. Somebody wrote a column about this in the last couple of days. Oh, Matt Kaminsky in the Wall Street Journal. But there's now a kind of bragging about the Jewish history in Poland by non-Jewish Poles, while in Western Europe you can see very real signs of anti-Semitism. So I was being quite explicit in my prepared remarks to say that the confidence I have about opportunities for Jews generally, and Orthodox Jews in particular tonight, are I can say with confidence only about America and of course Israel. Yes?
How do you see the relationship of the United States government today towards Israel? How do you see that unfolding over the next 2 years?
Well, it's a mixed picture. I mean, I think you know that. The relationship between the administration and Israel is not what it should be, let's put it that way. I've felt generally that the relationship between President Obama and Prime Minister Netanyahu is not as bad as some of the media make out, but it's not what any of us would want it to be. And some of the statements that others have made in the administration have been harmful. What happens with all that, I don't know. I will tell you this, and I travel, I keep in touch with people who I was privileged to meet all around the world. And when there seems to be, as somebody else said, space between America and Israel, this has an effect on American credibility in other places in the world like Asia, where our allies ask themselves, wow, if America is letting this kind of difference occur between the U.S. and Israel, what are they going to do to us? Are they going to stand with us if trouble occurs? I will say, on the other hand, that the support for a strong U.S.-Israel relationship in Congress is there, quite strong. And look, it's also true if President Obama was up here tonight, he'd say in response to that question, probably the military-to-military relationship between U.S. and Israel is as strong as it's ever been, and that's probably right. I mean, in other words, we have been, and some of that, I must say in fairness, is because of the pressure from Congress on programs like the Iron Dome. So what happens in the future, in the next couple of years, I don't know. And it's not, frankly, it's not good. What I'm saying is it's not good for either country. even though Israel is the small country, America is the superpower, a gap between the U.S. and Israel hurts American credibility and leadership throughout the world. Yes, I'm one of the students, yes. Well,
religious observance?
try that one again, I didn't hear it.
Do you feel that Jews lose opportunities in politics based on their religious observance?
I don't, and I've had a lot of experiences. Those 3 stories I told you were probably a way to try to say that. I mean, I will tell you, when I started out as a state senator, and people would invite me to a testimonial dinner for somebody who would help me in my campaign, or the high sheriff of New Haven County would ask me to come to his big annual picnic on a Saturday, and I said no. They were puzzled and sometimes angry, to tell you the truth. But once they realized that I was doing this consistently as a matter of religious observance, they accepted it and really ultimately respected it. So I would say not. I mean, you could find people who would say that in one election when I was seeking the nomination for lieutenant governor, it was on a Saturday, I didn't go to the convention, and maybe I didn't get it because I wasn't there. I don't think so, and as it turned out, it was better that I didn't get that nomination. But, Baruch Hashem. Yes, right behind you.
So I'm on the student currently, and I was wondering what you believe are the hopes for the, what do you believe are the hopes for future, should I start over?
I'm sorry, start again.
Okay, I'll start again. I'm currently a smicha student, and I was wondering what your
kind of student are you?
Rabbinical student.
Oh, a rabbinical student. Okay, that's you. You got the joke that I thought your Jewish religious observance wouldn't hurt your career in the rabbinate. Yeah. Okay.
So I was wondering what your hopes are for the future generation of rabbinic leadership, and where you believe our influence can be in the future.
Oh, look, the rabbis are still and probably always will be, certainly in Orthodox Judaism, at the center of our communal life. And, you have remarkable opportunities ahead of you to be a role model for your congregants, but also to teach them. And I hope, consistent with what I said, to urge them to reach out and be of service either in the broader Jewish community or the broader community generally. So no, you have tremendous... I view the rabbinate, although I'm not going to be teaching at REITs, I view the rabbinate as, in its own way, a very profound act of public service. Yes?
Tonight about a lot of different Jewish leaders, and I was wondering who you view as your main role model, both in the Torah and in Jewish history, in terms of Jewish leaders.
Wow, I don't know that I can answer that very well. Of course, I have a natural inclination toward Yosef, but it's by my name, and I know, citing a very good source, that Rav Soloveitchik, whose first name was also Yosef, was quite taken by Joseph. Moshe Rabbeinu is the ultimate model of leadership. In the Jewish world, it's as I said, Senator Ribikoff was a role model for me because he was the governor of Connecticut, Jewish, and then a senator, and I worked for him in a very impressionable time of my life as a college student, as an intern. But it's interesting, actually, as you ask that, I hope I'm not missing anybody in American history, because there have been great Jewish leaders in American history. My mind naturally goes to Israel. And, there were extraordinary leaders there. Obviously Herzl at the outset, but Jabotinsky, Begin, Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, You could go through the whole bunch of them, Levi Eshkol. So they were all really remarkable leaders who had talk about courage and the willingness to act, to change history. That's a generation that did it. I'm reading a very interesting book now by Hillel Halkin about Jabotinsky, which I'd recommend to everyone to read. Yes? I have to be careful about this question because this questioner is distantly related to me, so.
That's why it's going to be a harder question,
Hi,
Senator.
Benjamin, how are you?
Okay, good to
This
see
is
you.
from the southern branch of our family.
That is correct. It's good to see you. I
You
wanted
too.
to ask you, in light of your Jewish faith informing a lot of your comments and legislative record, how on issues like abortion and to a lesser extent gay marriage did you reconcile your faith and what the Torah says and
Yeah.
your legislative record?
So, pardon? Takes family to ask a question like that, right? So, as I said, I was informed by my faith and the teachings of rabbis and halakha, but I never felt that I wanted to ask anybody how to vote. And in both of those cases that you cite, because of values generally, including individual freedom, a kind of latent libertarianism in me, I supported both. I was both pro-choice. Pro-choice was very hard for me, but I ultimately decided, toward the end of my 10 years in the state Senate, that, every time I had a bill come up on this, I agitated, but I always voted the pro-choice way. And then I just had to accept that was the best I was going to do in a very difficult situation. When it came to gay rights, I just always felt, going back to the 70s, that this was a part of a person that should not be the basis for denying them equal rights, if I could put it generally. And I don't know what the attitude is among YU students today, but I will say on this question, there has been a more remarkable and rapid change of opinion from generation to generation than I've seen on, I think, anything else in my public career, which is to say that younger people generally have a totally different, very accepting view about gay rights. So it's reassuring to me as an older guy. Yes. Yes.
Your call to public service is heartwarming. Along with the call, though, comes obligation and responsibility. And theoretically, power, if one is in a position of power, that position can be abused. And I'm wondering if, in thinking about how you're going to be teaching students, people who will be in rabbinic leadership and in other leadership positions, how they need to be mindful of that power and what they do with it.
Yeah, that's very important. Actually, from a legislative perspective, while there are great exercises of power in our democratic system, the requirement to fashion a majority or in the Senate, 60 votes to break a filibuster really limits the power of any individuals. I mean, in the not so old days, when Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader, he had a lot of power. I must say a lot more got done than is getting done today. But there's no question that the executive still has extraordinary power if the executive chooses to use it. And your point is a good one. I haven't thought about it in terms of the course. What I've been talking to folks here about doing is teaching a course, for want of a better term, title for the moment in the second semester, which would be Studies in American Government and Politics, in which I want to take a series of situations I've been involved in, from election to serving in office. Probably when I was Attorney General, I had more executive authority and therefore more unilateral power than I ever had as a member of the legislature. And so I think what we want to do in the courses is combine some readings in traditional political science texts, but I understand that this chair has not been created because why you couldn't find another political scientist to teach a course. It's that to give me an opportunity and the responsibility to try to present to students with real life experiences that I had and try to help them, and frankly sometimes me, to learn from them. I've been teaching a course last semester on this at Columbia Law School, and it's fascinated me how much I've learned looking back at situations I've been involved in and going back and forth with the students. But your question is a very American question, because of the healthy skepticism toward the accumulation and exercise of power. Harry.
Professor Lieberman, I wanted to ask you about two ways in which Jewish law and the education that our students are getting here may be similar or different to public life, and ask for a comment. One question relates to the notion that you can have in psak, in Jewish decision-making, something that is strictly according to the letter of the law, din, or you can have pushara, something that is based on compromise, or and it seems that in public life, whether it's deciding to do governmental functions but not political functions on the Sabbath, whether it's deciding to reconcile yourself to a view of gay marriage and to a view of abortion, whether you would care to comment on a way in which that aspect of public life might relate to a certain way of viewing the role of a Jewish decisor or a certain trend in Jewish law. And the second question, which is related to that, is that many of the cases that the students study in the Talmud are cases of small scale that involve small communities. And now we live in a world where we have huge scalability problems, 2.2 million permanent residents of 16,000 nursing homes. You know, these are not problems that necessarily, you can't necessarily scale a Talmudic solution in a small community to a problem that involves millions of people. So I wonder if you could comment on those two ways in which the study of Jewish law might inform or not inform the pursuit of public policy.
That's a great question. I never thought about the first one. I can only say that if the precedents in Jewish law had an effect on the way I dealt with some of the questions I was deciding in public service, it was subconscious, really. In other words, it may be because that's the way I'd been taught to think that it had an effect on me. The second was the scale. Okay, you know, that's a fascinating question. And of course, remember that this is not fair, but you're right. To a certain extent, the Gemara Talmudic judgments are made from small-scale communities. And one of the challenges is to transport them to the enormous communities in which Jews are operating and exercising power. Certainly in a country like America, where we're given the opportunity to exercise political, economic, cultural, etc. power, but also, of course, most significantly in Israel, where there's now a state that has an obligation to pay regard. So, and yet, overall, really mostly due to the skill and wisdom of a current generation or more or less current generation of rabbis, the transition has been made. But I think from the small scale to the larger scale, but I think in doing so, you have to acknowledge and be mindful that we're painting on a much larger canvas now. I hope that's the beginning of an answer here. Mort, last question, Mr. Davis.
Joe, now that you've attained this eminent position, now that you've attained this eminent position, the professorship of the Rennet-sponsored Lieberman Chair, does that preempt your ever running again for vice president or governor?
Well, that's a great last question. I would say yes, it does, because for two reasons. One, that chapter of my life is over, and it was wonderful, really. I was very lucky, blessed. And the second is, I really love my wife, and I want to stay married to her. And, you get the point. I can't, again, thank you, Richard Rennertz, enough for facilitating this. This has been a wonderful evening. I think it's a taste of what's to come. I'll say to the students, without promising, that in the other courses I've taught years ago I'll tell you a story briefly, just to encourage you to take my course. I taught courses at Yale, the late 70s, early 80s. And two sitting members of the United States Senate, Sherrod Brown of Ohio and Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, were students of mine at Yale. So I won't say if you take my course, you're guaranteed, but it won't hurt. That's enough. Have a good night.
I just want to go on record that in response to Morty's question, although the senator said that he would not consider running for vice president, he left open the possibility of the presidency of Yeshiva University. Have a good evening.